What did Egyptian combat really involve? Surprises like ambushes, booby-trapped temples, and secret escape tunnels are just a few of their relentless tactics. Beneath the sand and sun was a civilization that knew how to fight, and built defenses so clever even time couldn't tear them down. Egypt didn't have castles, but it didn't need them. Because when your civilization stretches across deserts, floods, and crocodile-infested rivers, you don't build a castle. You build a fortress that works with the land. Temples doubled as bunkers. Border towns became military strongholds, and those pretty columns you admire in museum posters, they were sometimes the last thing an invading army saw before being turned into statue fertilizer. This wasn't Europe. It was hotter, drier, and a little more divine. Because in Egypt, defense didn't just mean mud brick and manpower. It meant gods, glyphs, and geometry. So today, we're going behind the walls of Egypt's fortified cities and sacred strongholds. From desert garrisons to temple fortresses so powerful they made invaders rethink their life choices. We're unpacking the lesser-known battlefield of ancient Egypt's military genius. If you want to understand ancient Egyptian defense, don't start with walls, start with a map. Because long before generals drew battle lines, Egypt had already stacked the deck with nature itself. Step 1. The Nile. It wasn't just a water source. It was a road, a barrier, and a weapon. Narrow choke points, sharp bends, and unpredictable currents made it the perfect line of defense, especially when crocodiles were your unofficial border patrol. Egyptian forts weren't scattered randomly across the desert like breadcrumbs. They were placed with precision on cliffs, at bottlenecks, along trade routes and invasion paths. These were not, maybe they'll come this way, guesses. These were, they will come this way, and will be waiting, power moves. Take Buin, for example. Built in Nubia, this stone fortress looked more like a mini-city than a military outpost. Towers, walls, moats, yes, moats in Egypt, all stacked against any army dumb enough to try their luck heading north. Or Tel El Dabba in the eastern delta, a military and trade hub that doubled as a first line of defense against threats from the Levant. If you were marching in from the northeast with dreams of conquest, guess what? You were on their turf now. Even Egypt's remote desert forts had a strategy. Built along caravan trails and hidden passes, these sand brick stations served as relay points, checkpoints, and early warning systems. Picture tiny fortresses crouched in the heat, surrounded by dunes, waiting to raise the alarm at the first sight of trouble. And let's not forget the psychological warfare. Imagine trekking across the desert for days, starving, sunburned, half your sandals disintegrated, only to arrive at a fortified outpost staffed by men who've been living there for years and still look ready to scrap. So no, they didn't build towering stone castles, but Egypt didn't need height. It had heat, distance, predators, and some very clever city planners. And when nature gives you crocodiles and cliffs, you don't build around them, you weaponize them. If you think mud brick sounds like a poor man's concrete, think again. Because in ancient Egypt, it was the ultimate defense material. These weren't your garden variety sun-baked bricks. These were walls, and they meant business. Picture this, 6 meters thick, stacked in layers with palm logs woven through the structure like ancient rebar. Not bad for something made of dirt and straw. And they didn't just build straight up. Egyptian engineers sloped the outer walls outward, a trick modern fort designers would later call talus. For the Egyptians, it meant attackers had to climb up a hot, angled surface while getting pelted with arrows, rocks, or possibly whatever wasn't nailed down. Try scaling that in 110-degree heat with a bronze spear and no ladder. But the brilliance didn't stop at slope. These walls were built in layers, Mud brick on the outside, compacted rubble in the center, and in some cases, lime-washed coatings on the surface. That white finish wasn't just for style points. It helped reflect the brutal desert sun and reduce heat absorption. Bonus: it also made the walls harder to burn, and arrows had a nasty habit of bouncing off rather than sinking in. Mud brick forts absorbed shock, resisted erosion, and blended perfectly into the desert terrain. Your enemy might not even see the outpost until it was too late. And by then, you were already in range of slingers and Nubian archers who'd been waiting in the shade all morning. So no, there were no towering stone turrets or moats filled with alligators. But when built right, a mud brick wall could outlast generations and turn a humble garrison into a desert fortress that whispered, "You're not getting in." Temples in ancient Egypt were just peaceful places to pray and burn a little incense. Some of them were fortresses in disguise. Welcome to Medinet Habu, where stone gods smiled down from 30-foot walls and also silently dared you to try something stupid. Egyptian gates weren't just doors, they were pressure points. Narrow, angled corridors forced attackers to funnel in single file, turning any invasion into a traffic jam of spears and screams. Some temples had baffle gates, twisty-turny passageways that slowed you down just enough for guards to take aim, or for gravity to introduce you to a sudden rain of stones from above. And if the architecture didn't stop you, the curses might. Seriously, temples weren't just defended by soldiers, they were spiritually booby-trapped. Wall carvings warned intruders that desecrating holy ground meant eternal punishment. Some inscriptions promised everything from blindness to being eaten by serpents in the afterlife. Whether you believed it or not, it added an extra layer of maybe don't touch that. And let's not forget the guards themselves. Armed with bows, spears, and probably a very short temper, these temple enforcers knew they weren't just protecting gold and scrolls, they were defending divine property. And the gods were watching, literally. Statues of falcons, cobras, and lion-headed deities were positioned like security cameras with a death stare. Temples like Medinet Habu were built with massive pylons, double-thick walls, and defensive platforms. They were more than holy sites, they were war bunkers with hieroglyphs. Think of them as the original multi-use facilities. Host a festival by day, hold off a siege by night. So next time you walk through an ancient temple and admire the carvings, just remember, that place might have once had a guard yelling, "Step away from the obelisk," while ducking a hail of arrows. Flat deserts, flat buildings, flat sandals. You'd think ancient Egypt was a flat-pack civilization. But when it came to defense, they went vertical. Egyptian forts, especially the big ones near the borders, featured square or rectangular watchtowers built right into their walls. These weren't just for dramatic flair. They gave guards a line of sight across the Nile floodplains, desert paths, or enemy choke points miles away. Basically, the ancient version of a motion-activated security camera, but with spears. On top of the walls, soldiers took cover behind parapets, low mud brick battlements, often crenellated to give archers just enough room to shoot without becoming pincushions. And those archers, deadly. With composite bows capable of sending arrows hundreds of feet, they could pepper invaders long before they reached the gates. Think of it like trying to charge a fortress while being chased by angry bees with incredible aim. And if you made it to the walls, that's when things got personal. Egyptians weren't shy about using their height advantage. They threw rocks, hurled sling stones, and in some reports, yes, really, poured hot sand down onto attackers. Forget boiling oil. Try sand that seeps into your armor, your sandals, and your soul. Sand doesn't just burn, it lingers. There's also evidence they used fire defensively. Torches and braziers weren't just for lighting up ceremonies, they became impromptu flamethrowers when invaders brought wooden siege gear a little too close to the wall. Oops! So while Egypt didn't have massive medieval-style keeps, they still mastered the art of fighting from above. Because when you live in a land where everything wants to kill you, snakes, heat, gods, you learn quickly that the higher ground isn't just an advantage, it's survival. Moats from the movies typically include muddy water, drawbridges, and a long way down for dramatic flair. While there were no drawbridges, ancient Egyptians still understood the power of a good ditch. Some fortified cities, temples, and royal compounds were built with dry or water-filled ditches, Egypt's version of "you shall not pass." They weren't just for show. These moats were wide, deep, and downright inconvenient if you were trying to storm a wall with sandals and a spear. Many of these ditches were dug around important sites like temples or administrative centers, especially in the delta and near frontier zones. They served a tactical function: slow down enemy infantry, trap invading chariots, and force attackers into tight, exposed kill zones. Basically, turn a sprint into a crawl, while archers on the walls aimed at your increasingly nervous face. But, plot twist, these moats weren't just about warfare, they were often symbolic too. In Egyptian belief, water separated order from chaos, civilization from the unknown, sacred land from the profane. So placing a moat around a temple wasn't just smart defense, it was like drawing a cosmic boundary line and saying, "Cross this, and you're not just trespassing, you're spiritually out of bounds." Some moats were filled with diverted Nile water. Others were dry ditches lined with stone or clay. Either way, digging them was brutal, and maintaining them during the dry season. Let's just say there was a reason no one fought over the job title ditch overseer. And yes, sometimes crocodiles were a thing, especially in Upper Egypt. Was it official policy? Probably not. Was it incredibly effective? Let's put it this way: no one likes a surprise amphibious ambush at ankle height. So, while moats might not be the first thing you think of when you imagine ancient Egypt, they were there, silent, stagnant, and waiting to ruin your day. We know the defenses now to keep attackers out. Let's change gears a bit and talk about what it was like inside the fort. Picture this. You're inside the walls, the gates are sealed, the enemy is outside hurling threats and probably rocks. Now what? Forget grand feasts. When the city was under siege, meals got downgraded fast. The staples? Flatbread, lentils, onions, and beer. Lots of beer, not for celebration, for survival. It was liquid bread, safer than Nile water, and just thick enough to count as a meal. Water, when available, was stored in huge ceramic jars sealed with mud and prayers. That water better last, because no one was making a grocery run anytime soon. Daily life during a siege was equal parts boredom, hunger, and panic. Space was tight. Sanitation was a polite disaster. Disease spread fast. Tempers frayed, and even the most hardened guards started side-eyeing the livestock in the courtyard like it might soon become soup. Mental stress ran high. Were the walls strong enough? Would reinforcements come? Was the moat still working, or had someone accidentally filled it with laundry runoff? And that wasn't even the worst of it. For the deeply religious Egyptians, sieges weren't just physical threats. They were spiritual events. Any disruption to Ma'at, the balance of the universe, could mean divine disapproval, or worse, a curse. So they turned to the gods, Bastet to guard the home, Sekhmet to strike down enemies, and also maybe keep the plague away. Thoth for wisdom and hopefully better decisions than the one that led to this siege in the first place. Amulets were worn, incense was burned, sacred texts were whispered in the shadows between shifts on the wall. Life under siege wasn't heroic. It was claustrophobic, sweaty, superstitious, and heavily dependent on dried lentils and whatever faith you could scrape together between enemy war cries. When all else failed, when the gates splintered, the walls cracked, and the sacred moat became a glorified puddle, some Egyptians didn't stick around to see what happened next. They vanished. Not by magic, but by pre-planned engineering. Welcome to the world of secret tunnels and divine exits. Forget trapdoors in castles. Egypt had its own version, tucked away beneath temples, tombs, and administrative buildings. Some temple complexes were built with narrow corridors that didn't just lead to hidden shrines. They could be escape routes for priests, guards, and anyone whose job description included "don't get caught when the city burns." In some cases, these weren't just shortcuts. They were engineered lifelines, sloped shafts carved into bedrock, tunnels hidden behind false walls, subterranean routes that connected to crypts, cisterns, or even led out beyond the city walls. You'd emerge scratched, sweaty, and ankle-deep in sacred dust, but alive. And it wasn't only the living who used them. Tomb complexes sometimes featured emergency exits meant for spirit processions, or, according to some theories, just-in-case routes for priests doing rituals in unstable political times. Because nothing says insurance policy like a carved tunnel beneath a temple to sneak out during a divine PR crisis. Did everyone get to use them? Nope. These were VIP passes, reserved for the high priest, the royal courier, or the pharaoh's guy who always happened to know a back way. So, while most defenders faced the brutal reality of battle head-on, a select few slipped quietly into the shadows, escaping through a hallway that even the invaders didn't know existed. It wasn't cowardice, it was strategy, and possibly divine intervention, with a chisel. Now then, just because you were under siege didn't mean you were sitting ducks. Ancient Egyptian defenders didn't just hunker down and wait for fate. Sometimes they opened the gates and charged. Fortresses were often built with narrow side exits or concealed sally tunnels, not for sneaking out quietly, but for launching surprise night raids. Imagine you're an invading force, exhausted, cranky, and thinking your enemies are asleep, when suddenly a squad of soldiers bursts out from the dark, torches blazing and blades swinging. Surprise! Your midnight snack just became a battlefield. And when brute force wasn't enough, Egyptians reached for a different kind of weapon: psychology. Loud drums echoed from behind the walls, flaming torches lit up temple tops, incense smoke billowed like ghostly fog, entire troops marched in formation purely to be seen. The message was clear. We're not afraid. In fact, we're about to make you afraid. But the real mind game: divine imagery. The pharaoh wasn't just a king, he was a living god. And his face, carved in stone or painted on banners, loomed over the battlefield like a divine mugshot. Warriors fought with amulets of Horus on their chests and invoked Sekhmet before charging. To outsiders, it might have looked like religious pageantry. To Egyptians, it was spiritual domination, a cosmic flex designed to demoralize enemies before a single arrow was loosed. And it worked. Invasions stalled. Raiders hesitated, because fighting a man is one thing. Fighting someone backed by the full wrath of Ra, that's a different nightmare entirely. So maybe ancient Egypt didn't have towering stone castles with drawbridges and turrets, but who needs moats full of mysterious critters when you've got the actual Nile and real crocodiles? Egyptian defense wasn't about looking intimidating. It was about working smart. They built mud brick walls thick enough to shrug off arrows. They turned temples into strongholds, deserts into barriers, canals into moats, and gods into tactical allies. And when the enemy came knocking, they answered with drum beats, divine curses, and an ambush through a side tunnel you didn't know existed. Sunlight, superstition, and smart engineering, that's what kept Egypt standing while empires rose and fell around them. They didn't just build cities, they built survival systems. Because in the land of the pharaohs, defense wasn't about brute force. It was about patience, pressure, planning, and a little bit of divine intimidation for good measure. If this peek into Egypt's ancient strongholds made you rethink what castle defense really means, hit that subscribe button and tell us in the comments, would you rather defend a mud brick temple fortress or try to siege one under a blazing desert sun? We've got more ancient secrets, lost strategies, and dusty brilliance coming soon. Because history isn't just gold masks and pyramids. It's every trench, trapdoor, and torch-lit hallway that helped a civilization survive.